I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today via video instead of our normal setup. I really do appreciate it. There we go. We'll get started with session two, People of the Books. I also appreciate you watching this video before we meet with Rabbi Azrael on the 12th. So again, apologies for having to cancel a day. Did not want to expose you to the lovely COVID. Um, and everything was fine. Sorry about being sick. That was so not my intention. I tried really hard, you guys, to not get sick. But again, thanks for your willingness to watch a recorded class rather than being together. Not as much fun. I've never taught in this manner. The only way I've taught via video is with kids interacting and students interacting. So I'm going to do my very best. This will be much shorter class than what was planned with our interactive pieces as well. You have handouts that I send via email as well that you can use for any note taking. And also, there's a lot more background information to continue and expand upon today's video that you're watching. So, our objectives for today are getting a bird's eye view of the Torah, meaning way up in the air, not diving into a lot of details about the Torah, but understanding what is Torah, what is it made out of, what are the big ideas, and then also understanding other Jewish texts and doing, well, a little investigation, more of just understanding about it. And then we're going to have a basic intro to Hebrew today. However, that's something I want to do with you in person in the same room. I'm going to save that for another day soon. I promise it will get to you. All right. Okay, let's dive right in. So, when people talk about the essence or the features of Judaism, four big things come up. The first one being culture. So, the people, family, how people feel that they're Jewish in a way. Like we talked about in our first session a few weeks ago about the different denominations of Judaism and about the different cultural groupings. So, where people originated from in the world and how that connects with their Judaism and the different rituals, the liturgy, lots of different parts of the religion. So, that is one feature, essence of Judaism. Another is the ethics and the values systems, which we will get in next week into next week in a couple weeks when we talk with Rabbi Azra about what Jewish people believe. The legal system, which has to do with the Talmud and different legal decisions that have been made regarding what does Judaism say about this topic and this topic. And then religion, really, it comes down to, oh, it's a religion also. So all these things combined together are really what a lot of people say make up Judaism. A framework of Judaism comes from God, Israel, and Torah. Okay, these three things work together in different ways. And today we're going to focus on Torah. Okay, when we talk about Torah, that is part of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, when we say the Hebrew Bible, we're not referring to the Old Testament. That is a term that people use, but that is talking about it in conjunction with there being a New Testament. Of course, there's a New Testament that millions and millions of people believe in. But when we're talking about Judaism, this came before that. And so when we talk about Judaism, we don't say Old Testament as Jews. We say the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures. Those are all appropriate ways to discuss the Hebrew teachings. When we look at the Hebrew Bible. We call it Tanakh. Hear that throaty sound at the end? Tanakh. So it's really an acronym, and with the T, the N, and the CH or the K sound at the end. T stands for Torah, which we'll talk about. N stands for Nevi'im, which is the Hebrew word for prophets, the writings of the prophets. And then the K sound at the end, the Ch at the end stands for Ketuvim, which is the Hebrew word for writings. So different stories that are told at different times of the year. Okay, so it really is an acronym of these things put together make up the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible. So the Torah, the first part of the Tanakh, okay? There are 5 books in the Torah that we will talk about today. The first one is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Inside the Torah, there are 54 portions, and the Hebrew word for portion is parsha, singular. Um, these portions are read on Shabbat, which is our weekly Sabbaths from Friday night to Saturday night, read on Shabbat morning. In some communities, they're also read on Monday morning services and Thursday services. Um, it just depends on the community. And it takes over 1 year, just over 1 year to read the Torah. So we know 52 weeks in our Gregorian calendar, 54 portions. So it's each year it's kind of a little bit different exactly when these fall. Throughout the 5 books, there are 613 total commandments that God has provided to the people of Israel to live a good life. These are the instructions, okay? There are individual commandments just for the individual to, teach within their family and to provide their good life. And then also as a community, there are commandments as well. This picture shows a Torah that's dressed, this is how it's stored when we're not reading it. You can see a Torah in the form of a book, right? It's not always in the scrolls, but when you read it in a synagogue, um, like during a service, it will be on scrolls. And this is just a drawing of what it looks like when it's open, but we'll look at that closer in a minute. So like I said, there are 54 sections or parshiot. That's the plural of parsha. And each week a parsha is publicly read on Shabbat morning. There are between 2 to 6 sections for each parsha. So each day of the week between each Sabbath can have its own lesson or part of a lesson to learn, depending on how people choose to study Torah and how the communities choose to study Torah. The final parsha of the year is always read on Simchat Torah, which that follows the lunar solar Hebrew calendar, which we will look at in a few weeks, what that means. So certain parts of the Torah always align with different parts of the calendar year. Oh, and sorry, this is what a Torah looks like when it is open. It is a scroll that's continuous all the way through. Um, Normally we wouldn't set the yod, which is the pointer, down right on the scroll like that, but it is so holy that we do not touch it with our finger. So a yod is the only thing, the metal yod is the only thing that does physically touch the scroll. Let's look at parts of the Torah. So the Sefer Torah is the whole thing, the Torah scroll altogether. Um, the crown, so in some of them they have like a one-piece crown. It's called the Keter. The image, like the real picture here I have, it doesn't have a crown. They have separate 2 crowns on it. They are also sometimes called the pomegranates, the rimonim. Um, on the scroll itself, it's called the mantle, which is the ketonet. That covers and protects the scroll. Well, all of it does. Hanging on one of the scrolls, one of the sides is the yad, which literally means hand. So instead of using our finger to follow along with the tiny little print inside the Torah when we're reading it in Hebrew, we use a yad to touch it so that the oils from our fingers are not damaging in any way the sacred scrolls. It's kind of fun to use. I like it because it gives you that, you have a special tool to use as you're following along, reading the Holy Scrolls. When you take off the mantle, there is a belt on it, kind of like keeping the scrolls together so that it stays in the correct spot. Above the mantle is like a breastplate called a choshen. And then the wooden scrolls themselves are called the Tree of Life, the Etz Chaim. So those are all the parts of the Torah. This Torah sits in the Ark during services, and when it's not being read, it is kept either in the Ark or right on a stand while the service continues before we return it to the Ark in the Torah service Torah portion service. So the word Torah, which you can see in Hebrew, goes from right to left, and I promise I'll show you that soon a little bit more. Torah, the root of the word Torah, so roots, there are roots in Hebrew, just like there are like base words in English. The root means yara, or the root is yara, and that means to shoot, like at a target, like with an arrow. So really the root meaning of Torah is to shoot in the correct direction or point in the right way, which makes sense to me because it's like instructions for a good life, instructions for following a good life. It's the teachings, the instructions. We're shooting at a target to do our very best, even though we're humans, to follow a good life with those commandments that we've talked about. So let's get into the first book of the 5 books of Torah. The first book is Genesis, and in Hebrew, it's Bereshit. Okay. In the book of Genesis, there are 12 portions. There's of course, the first story of creation. Bereshit means in the beginning. So that word is the very first word in Torah. So we started off with creation, creation of light, creation of sky. So the separation between the earth and the sky, creation of the seas, the earth, the vegetation, the sun, the moon, the stars. The next day was the fish and the birds, and then the animals, humans. And then the last day was Sabbath, the day of rest. Next was talking about mankind. So creating the Garden of Eden, bringing Adam and Eve into existence, and then ultimately being cast out of the Garden of Eden for not following the very first rules that God gave the first man and woman. In Genesis, we have the stories of Cain and Abel, Noah and the ark and the flood, the Tower of Babel, which separated um, the people that were living at that time into 70 different nations and different languages, and also started to talk about the chosenness of the Jewish people being God's people, but also explaining that all of God's blessings are given to all the people in the world, not just God's chosen people. Continuing on with Genesis, it moves into stories about the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the religion. So that's Abraham's family, which was the family of Israel. It's all still in Genesis. So God promises to be with Abraham, to protect and guide, promises the land of Canaan, which is Israel, gives descendants, and provide blessing for all nations, as I mentioned. So within Genesis, they talk about this family. So Abraham and his wife Sarah, they represent kindness through always having an open home, being very hospitable, and all the stories kind of lead back to some of these core values of Judaism, like kindness is one. Their son Isaac and Rachel represent justice, and that comes through with the story of the binding of Isaac and other stories about them that are different within different parshas in Genesis. Then there's a story of Jacob and Rebecca slash Leah, so with his 2 different wives, which was like their focus was on truth, finding the truth in things, because Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah when he wanted to marry Rebecca. We'll talk more about that when we talk about weddings. So stories revolving around truth and telling the truth. And then Joseph and his brothers. So that's more of the stories of the children of Israel and the 12 tribes of Israel. That's very much in a nutshell. There's so much more to say. Next is Exodus. Exodus in Hebrew is Shemot. That means going out. So in Shemot or in Exodus, there are 11 portions, and it's really about the nation of Israel and the development of that nation. So at the end of Genesis, the people of Israel have gone to Egypt because there was a famine. So when they went to Egypt, they were there for 210 years. The first 94 years, they were free living there. And then they became enslaved for the next 116 years, roughly. um, During this time, there are a lot of stories going on in there, but the biggest part of Exodus has to do with introduction of Moses. So Moses was cast away as a baby, and he was saved in a basket in the River Nile. And then he was raised by the Pharaoh, so the leader of Egypt's family in the palace. So he grew up in the palace being raised as an Egyptian, but really he was a Jew. Um, Throughout his life, Moses sees Jewish people suffering, through being enslaved, and he ends up kind of fighting back against that and running away to another city. But then at the age of 80, so his life has gone by, but at the age of 80, he sees the burning bush and it tells him, he starts hearing that he needs to go back to Egypt to free the rest of the Jewish people. Things were getting worse and worse for the Jewish people in Egypt, and it was time to free to free the enslaved people. So in Exodus, there's a story of the 10 plagues, which is the Passover story. Um, After that, and crossing the Red Sea, there's the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, receiving of the Ten Commandments, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. And then also in Exodus are the laws about building a tabernacle, which is a movable, portable sanctuary, and also the story of the golden calf, which had to do with the Israelites worshiping an idol, which is part of the Ten Commandments you cannot do. But they were concerned and thought Moses was gone, so they, were finding a way to feel comfort, sort of. So in Exodus, we get 10 commandments and 101 other mitzvot are talked about within this book in those 11 portions. So I'm sure that you have maybe a lot of background, maybe some background, maybe some way back in your memory learning about the 10 Commandments. I wanted to include this just to go over them as it's such a huge part of our religion, the first 10 Commandments. This like graphic organizer that has the pictures is in your handouts as well. So no need to write this down or anything like that. So the commandments are organized. The first five, 1 through 5, are humans related to God. So, how do humans treat God? And then number 6 through 10 are human to human interaction. So, the first one is to believe in one God. Number 2 is do not worship idols. So, only worship God. Number 3 is do not take God's name in vain. Number 4 is keep the Shabbos, which means keep Shabbat, the Sabbath. Number 5 is honor your parents. So that is connected into honoring God because as God explained, as it's been written on the Ten Commandments, honoring your parents is like honoring the people above you, your ancestors going up. Okay, number 6 is do not murder. Number 7, do not commit adultery. Number 8, do not steal or kidnap. Number 9, do not give a false testimony or lie. And number 10, do not covet fellows' possessions, so jealousy. So, in a nutshell, those are the 10 commandments that Moses received during Exodus. So, there was a lot in that second book of the Torah. Moving on to the third book of the Torah that's called Leviticus. In Hebrew, it's called Vayikra. It's named for its opening word, meaning and he called, meaning God is calling out to Moses and transmitting a set of instructions for what will be the sacrificial system of the temple. So at this point in the story, the Jewish people are not in a land of their own. They are in the desert moving. Okay, so this is really talking about the tribe of Levi, like the priest that were appointed to serve in the temple. Pardon me. And it's a lot of communication to Moses about the function of the tabernacle. How is it going to work? Lots of details. Lots of the commandments are very detailed regarding the portable sanctuary. talks about offerings and sacrifices, which obviously are not applicable today anymore, all of them. The inauguration of priests. Now, priests were from the tribe um, of the Levites, and the priests were the Kohanim. So those Aaron, okay, one of the sons, Aaron becomes the high priest, and all the descendants of Aaron are also priests. So today, some names that you might like, surnames that you might hear that are descendants of these high priests come down to Cohn, Khan, Cohn spelled this way, Kahana, Kagan, Katz, Zach. These are all um, different ways to say this name of the high priest. Okay. There's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about the temple service, where to keep Torah, where to keep the holy things, how to um, follow the kosher dietary laws, which we will talk more about when we talk about Jewish homes, and also talking about the festival days of the Jewish year. Um, it's very detailed. This book goes into lots of details, but it's interesting nonetheless. Leviticus also talks about holiness, which means separation. So if something is holy, it is kept in a certain way, in a special way, set apart from the regular. It talks about bodies and how physical bodies can represent spiritual condition. It discusses how sometimes physical ailments can, back then, it would lead to exile because it would show that something was unholy in a person and they needed to, go through some sort of spiritual cleansing to come back into the community. Talks about the Yom Kippur service and the mandate and commandments to be holy on certain days as the nation of Israel. The priests and the holidays, so it focused on spirituality during the holidays, and how the priests are commanded to stay holy, to stay separate if needed, depending on what's going on in the community. Additionally, it talks about the land. So, how to be holy to the land, meaning every 7 years there's a sabbatical for the land, and different parts of the land, the agricultural land, are rested. And then it also talks about every 50 years there's a jubilee. So, there's a complete rest of all the land. There are blessings for following these rules, and there are curses for not following these rules when it comes to the land. So it is very important. There's a lot to learn about that if you're interested in that. Okay, moving on to Numbers, which is Bamidbar. Numbers. It means in the wilderness. So these were the desert years, wandering in the desert until they approach the promised land of Israel. It starts with a census of the people, so that makes sense with numbers, and prepares them for entering Israel. In general, this book is about complaints that people are having, with wandering in the desert is not a comfortable thing to do for so long. Sins that happen, punishments that happen, and an attempted rebellion to leave Moses as their leader and find something, find the right way. How are they going to get out of this wandering? Numbers ends by explaining places that Israelites have traveled and also showing Israel's boundaries that is promised in the future. Okay, last is Deuteronomy, Devarim. Okay, Devarim is defined as words, but it doesn't mean just any words. It's like things and matters, so it can be more weighty words, powerful words, which makes sense because in this final book, Moses gives his last speech to the people of Israel before they cross into the Jordan River and enter. And that's without him. Um, Moses is not going to survive long enough to go into the land of Israel. He goes over he summarizes about the miracles in the land of Egypt, summarizes about the covenants with God and how the laws have been given, reminders about the choices that the people have made about breaking the law and, idolizing the golden calf. there's warnings involved in his speech. He summarizes the history, the covenants we said, and talks about the covenant with God to ensure their survival as a people, and gives people a choice, either life or death. He predicts that they're going to fail again and be exiled again, but he has hope in God to promise the rescue to the people of Israel. In summary, there are 200 additional mitzvot revealed in this time, so that's quite a lot more that Moses explains, like in his conclusion speech. But the end of Deuteronomy, it's unresolved. It's kind of a cliffhanger. It is identified that Joshua is Moses' successor as they go into the land of Israel, but that's kind of where it leaves off. You have a handout. If you can see me, I think you can see me. This kind of bigger handout that I attached as a PDF that, this explains all of the Torah and then goes into Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and Ketuvim, and it gives you a little bit more background. And when we're back together again, I promise I'll give you that on paper so that you can take a closer look at it, because it does give a little bit more background. So remember, the the Tanakh is the Hebrew Bible. Okay, starts with Torah, then it's N stands for Nevi'im, which is prophets, then H or K sound for Ketuvim, which is writings. When we look at Nevi'im, there's the books of the prophets. This can also be called the Haftarah, because when you read in Shabbat, when we read a portion of the Torah, you also read a portion from prophets called the Haftarah. They are connected in a way to support the main idea in the Torah portion with something that makes sense to go along with that portion itself, whatever the themes are. So in these books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Lamentations, Chronicles, and Ezra, that's talking more about the history of the people. More prophecy with these books here. Talking about wisdom, they're kind of categorized in this way: Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and then poetry as well, and Psalms and Songs of Songs. It's a mixture of things in the prophets, but it is part of our Hebrew Bible. And then for Ketuvim, which is the last part of the Hebrew official written Hebrew Bible, there are 5 books also, and they're called Megillah, and they're stories. So they're told and sung and read at different times throughout the year. So there's Esther, which is read at Purim, which is a holiday we'll talk about it's like the end of winter time usually, March usually. Then there's Ruth, which is read during Shavuot, which is like the kind of the beginning, almost coming up upon summertime. The Songs of Songs is read during Passover, which is has a lot of spring imagery in it, rebirth, liberation, exiting Egypt. Lamentations is read it talks about the tragedies of the Jewish history, read on a holiday called Tisha B'Av, which is the fasting holiday, recounts the destruction of the first and the second temples. Ecclesiastes is read on Sukkot, which is most recently, talks about different seasons for different times of life and the fragility of life. Ketuvim. Okay. Now we're going to just talk a little bit about what is oral law. Okay, that was the written Torah. Well, sorry, written Bible, Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. Okay. The written Torah is like the official word. Okay, that's written there. That's the Constitution. We can kind of think of it in America sense. It's the Constitution. It's there. Now we have things that are kind of more oral law that we talk about. So the Mishnah talks about what the rabbis say about the Torah's official stance on things and gives more and more and more details. And the Talmud is the Babylonian edition from 500 CE and talks and discusses more about what those original rabbis say. So it's a discussion about a discussion and an argument about this discussion and more details about this discussion. And that's all meant for people to be set up to have arguments, to talk about what they think. It kind of goes off into stories that are associated, it meanders, and it's complex. So there are no real um, totally resolutions to things, no punchlines to the rules that they're talking about. It's meant to be messy, it's meant to be complex, and it's meant to evolve as time goes on. So when we look at a page of the Talmud, this is kind of how it's set up. Okay, so um, and you have a handout also. Oh, let's see where that is. One second. You have a handout that looks like this as well, that gives you much more details. Here, I'll just, looks like this. There's one side that looks is in Hebrew, just so you can see what it looks like. And the other side is a guide to the layout of a Talmud page. So in the middle, you have the Mishnah and the Gemara, which are the Talmud that talks about what it actually says. And then you have all these commentaries around it. So Rashi was a scholar in France and is very widely renowned. So what Rashi said about it is in this little section here. And then the Tosafot is over here, more commentaries about what they said. It explains it a little bit more. And on this page that's written in English, it gives you more detail about who are these people and why is it important on this one page of Talmud. So I think it's kind of cool because it's all compiled into one page about this one part of the Talmud. Because it's so complex and because it really isn't something that Jewish people learn about as they're growing up as children. I found this video that I do want to share and want to watch. I'm just going to share it here so we can watch it together. Um, and it's called Where Do Jewish Laws Come From? So,
Judaism's pretty focused on what you
just gonna, there we go. It's like 3.5 minutes, so just stick with me. Here, I'll just turn
do from day to day. Not just when and how to pray, but how to eat, raise kids, farm, cut your fingernails. If you want to learn how to live in a Jewish way, you can watch all our videos, but eventually you're going to want to dive into Jewish law, or halacha. Some people say halacha, some people say halacha, which means the path or the way. Here's an overview. It starts with the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible includes the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. For short, you can call the Hebrew Bible Tanakh, which stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. If you're Jewish, saying Tanakh beats the pants off saying Old Testament, which is a Christian term used in contrast to the New Testament. When the Hebrew Bible was being codified, there was debate over which books to include in the canon. And there's a whole list of books called the Apocrypha that didn't quite make the cut. Some of these books are actually in the Christian Bible, the Book of Maccabees, for instance. And there's other books called the Pseudepigrapha that didn't make it into anyone's Bible. Inside the Hebrew Bible, there are lots of laws and stories that later generations weren't sure how to interpret. For example, the Torah says not to work on the Sabbath, but what does that mean? What's work? Does it apply to office jobs or just manual labor? Does it include working out? So along come 6 relatively short books called the Mishnah, which try to explain it in a style that's pretty straightforward and sparse. The Mishnah gives a list of 39 things not to do on Shabbat, like baking, sewing, building, etc. It doesn't really explain why those 39 activities are forbidden, it just gives the list. And then, just as the Mishnah tries to explain the Torah, there's another set of books that attempt to explain the Mishnah. This is called the Gemara, and it's massive. 63 tractates, or sections. The Gemara elaborates on the Mishnah by going into a long conversation. So the Mishnah says simply, you can't thresh on Shabbat. Great, no problem, you say. But the rabbis in the Gemara took on, what does that mean for us today? And they extrapolated, well, you can't just avoid threshing grain. The act of removing a seed kernel from its tough outer layer is a lot like shucking corn, so let's not do that either. You also can't wring out a washcloth or squeeze lemon into your tea. Extrapolation. Together, the Mishnah and Gemara are called the Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds, the Babylonian, or the Bavli, and the Jerusalem edition, or the Yerushalmi. Same basic idea, but they were put together in 2 different locations, so they have some really interesting variations. The Talmud is so large that yet another set of texts came along to simplify and codify it, the Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. And yet, if you spent years making your way through all those texts, you still wouldn't know everything Jewish, like, say, whether escalators are allowed on Shabbat. So along comes modern Jewish case law. People send questions about specific situations to an expert and receive written answers called responsa. You can look up responsa online, and they cover everything from immunization to gambling to escalators. The written Torah is considered sacred, obviously, and Jews view all the texts that came after as sacred also. They are known as oral Torah. Jewish law is not frozen in time, it's continuing to unfold today. Local communities are empowered to study and interpret halakha. This varies a lot in different branches of Judaism today. In some communities, all the texts that we've discussed are considered binding. And if there's a question about them, you go to your local rabbi, whose decisions are binding. In other communities, people are individually free to study and make their own decisions about halakha. These really different approaches to understanding and observing Jewish law are one of the main differences behind different Jewish movements. For more about the various Jewish movements, watch the next video in the Judaism 101 series.
So she mentioned that this comes from BIMBOM. Just going to show you this. I will show you some videos from BIMBOM sometimes if they're applicable. It's great though. There's so much to see. I will share out information, some of the videos as well. Okay. So just a little bit more, hopefully that gave you a little bit more understanding of like how they're all connected, where they came from, all these these types of books together. Every day, some people study one page of Talmud. So it's called Daf Yomi, which is a page a day. Talmud takes 7.5 years to study all the way through, and people study the same page throughout all the different communities a day if they're following the Daf Yomi schedule. So sometimes there's, people will do that together on their own today around the world. So today I'm recording this on November 1st, 2023. They're reading the page Kedushin 80. So I tried to find a great summary of that to explain with you. However, it was very detailed. It was like zooming in to zoom in to zoom in, and it wouldn't have made total sense. I believe it was talking about house having to do with kosher laws and dietary and what is allowed in houses or not. But it is very detailed. You can imagine, 7.5 years to read the whole thing. If you read a whole page a day is pretty detailed, but communities around Omaha do read it. I know every day Beth Israel does have a Daf Yomi meetup. It's on their calendar every day. So that's happening. So in conclusion, for today, for our, abbreviated lesson today, we were going to do more interactive things, I promise. Talking about Torah, right? They're the first 5 books in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is made up of Torah, prophets, and writings. Then we have the oral Torah comprised of the Mishnah, the Talmud, the commentary, continuing to evolve all the time. And I promise we will find a time in upcoming sessions to have our little introduction to Hebrew language, letters and sounds. It's just fascinating. I told you I was an English teacher for a long time. I've been a Hebrew teacher for a long time, especially decoding, like reading Hebrew words. And I just want to give you an introduction to that. There's so much more to learn, of course. If you have questions or you want to add to our long list of questions that we have for different topics, when we talk to our rabbis at the end of this series of classes, please just email me. Okay, please just email me or give me a call. That's fine too. I want to remind or talk a little bit about our next in-person session. Okay, in person, Sunday, November 12th at Ovation Heartward Preserve with Rabbi Aryeh Azrael. There's a picture of him, so you know who he is. I will be there too, so no worries. We're going to be all together. And some of you, this will be your first time joining us. And I'm excited to meet you in person too. So Rabbi Azrael lives at Ovation. This is his independent living facility. It's beautiful. It's on 146th and Pacific Street. So you'll take Pacific just past Millard North and you'll turn right. If you're coming from the east, you'll turn right. Just, follow your GPS. we'll meet in the main area. Rabbi Azrael was my rabbi growing up. He was senior rabbi at Temple Israel until his retirement in 2016. He is a founding clergy member of the Tri-Faith Initiative. If you're familiar with that, we briefly mentioned it in our first session. I'd like for him to tell us a little bit about that. And he's now like a rabbi emeritus at Temple Israel, meaning he'll always be a rabbi at Temple Israel. Wealth of knowledge. He's from Israel, lived in Omaha a very long time, lived in Baltimore before that, and around in America. And our topic with Rabbi is, what do Jewish people believe? We're going to talk about the commandments more. We're going to talk about the 13 principles. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. And I'm just really excited for you to meet Rabbi Azrael. Come with questions. It's open for lots of questions, as you know. And I look forward to seeing you there. Take a look at the different things that are in the email I sent you, and hopefully we'll be ready to learn together again in person on Sunday the 12th. Please call, email me if you have any questions in between now and then. All right, thanks again. See you next time.